Hello and welcome to the Jackie Tan podcast. If you are new here, I'm so glad to have you around. Thank you for being here. And if you're an OG listener, then welcome back. You're awesome and I appreciate you. Before we get into this week's episode, I just wanted to ask a quick favor, and that is if you haven't yet rated, reviewed, or subscribed to the podcast, could you take 30 seconds to do that? It really does help the podcast continue to grow, and it means that I get to continue to talk to incredible people and do work that's really meaningful to me. So I would be forever grateful if you could take 30 seconds to do that. Now, on to the episode. So on this week's episode, I have the privilege of chatting to an extraordinary woman, and I first met her at the gym, as you do. Our trainer, Josh, said that we really needed a chat, and I'm so grateful that he did say that, because when we finally sat down for coffee, it's one of those coffee chats that just goes on and you don't realize the time has flown. So I'm so excited to bring this episode, and I'm hoping many more with her. Her name, Dr. Alexandra Guhde. She's a clinical psychologist with over 15 years experience. She's now based in Adelaide after years in California and Sydney, and she works with a wide range of clients from Olympians to executives, helping them not just achieve success, but find wholeness and meaning in their lives. Her approach is all about turning life's challenges into opportunities for growth. Alex has this beautiful way with words, and when I listen to her speak, I'm just so curious as to obviously her experience, but also the way she thinks. And it really helps me open up my mind to see a completely different perspective, but also I'm sure you can relate to this. Like, when we're going through life within our own bubble of our own experiences, of our own rose-colored glasses or whatever color they are for you. And when you get to hear or sit down and talk with someone like Alex, she helps you firstly to remove those glasses, but with such a care and in a way that's so comfortable to be able to explore these different notions or narratives or reality or whatever it is. It was such a wonderful conversation. Now, let me tell you what we talked about. We talk about psychology, the art of psychology, and why actually every single person in the world should be in therapy. And she really does break down the myths around therapy. And one big one that was that I've always thought, we talk about that at the end as well. So this was a really enjoyable, wonderful, eye-opening episode, and I really hope you enjoy it because she's coming back. Anyway, let's get into this one. This is with Dr. Alexandra Guhde. Alex, thank you so much for chatting with me today.
Oh,
welcome
my
to the
pleasure.
podcast. I've got to say that I have been struggling with how to introduce you.
Mm.
We caught up for the first time a couple of weeks ago. We chatted for 90 minutes. And in that 90 minutes, your life to me has just been there's been so much. And I realized that actually, I'm going to call myself out here. I realized this was about an hour ago after I read the first 10 pages of your book that language and the words can reduce so much from a person's experience.
Yes.
And I've been thinking about the way that I introduce people and how it is their qualification or their accomplishments. And we're so much more than all of that. And so I've been struggling, but for context, for people to even know what you do,
sure.
You're a clinical psychologist.
I am.
And today we are going to be talking about therapy and the art of therapy. But first, I would love for you to explain a little bit of, I guess, how you chose psychology and how you got into this field.
Sure. Yeah, happy to. It's funny you bring that up about qualifications, because that was one of the sort of a running joke at when I was doing my training. So I have a doctorate in clinical psychology, and the joke was that when we get our doctorates, everyone will call us Dr. So-and-so. And the professors kept saying, no, they will call you Alex. Because nobody knows. Right? And I get all the time questions, what's the difference between a psychologist and a psychiatrist, or a counselor and a social worker? And there are so many different credentials. And really, I mean, part of what I want to talk with you about today is how, that all matters. Good training matters. But what really matters is a relationship between two human souls. So how I became a therapist is simply because I didn't like my job. I was working as a copywriter at a worldwide advertising agency. It was actually Saatchi & Saatchi. And I never wanted to be in advertising. Part of my sort of life journey has been learning that, like, it's a series of course corrections, that what I wanted to do when I was a little kid was all about creativity. And I wanted to be a writer. I wanted to be an artist. I wanted to be a fashion designer. I wanted to be a veterinarian. There's all this different stuff. And, when it came down to it, I needed to make a practical choice. And I knew I didn't want to do, like medical school was what was expected of me. And I knew I really didn't want to do it. I didn't want to do it. So I want to go to art school. So I went to art school. But I knew that I needed to get a job and be practical when I was done. So I went to art school for graphic design, because I thought I can be a designer and I will be able to earn a living. And I hated it. I hated every minute of it. I hate using the computer. Like, I like to draw. I like to paint. I like to do that stuff. I did not like to sit there and like fiddle with things on a screen. So I never worked a day as a designer. When I got out, I went into copywriting. Just because a professor mentioned it to me, and I had no idea it existed as a profession. And I quite enjoyed the creative challenge of it, but I didn't approve of what I was doing. Like, my main client was DuPont, who is currently like poisoning the groundwater in America. And, and I was making ads for them, really creative, fun ads. And so I went to therapy myself, because I would cry every Sunday night before I went to work. I was so unhappy. And I went to therapy, and I said to the therapist, I still remember my first session. She just, first of all, I was a half an hour late because I was so nervous. I got lost. And she said, well, let's just talk. Tell me a little bit about, why you're here. And I said, I'm here because I hate my job and I don't know what I want to do. And she said, okay. And she said she loved working with creative people. And then she started asking questions about my family. And she said, tell me a little bit about your relationship with your mother. I said, I have a great relationship with my mother. She's like my best friend. I don't need to talk about that at all. So 3 years later, talking about my relationship with my mother, I had a new job. So it was all, and that was what the thing that really drew me into therapy was how nonlinear, how creative, like how revelatory the process was. Like, sessions were fun. I cried a lot. Like, it was hard work. I had to change my whole relationship with my mother, which it got much, much worse, and then much, much better. So but I had to do this growing work so that I could know myself and make choices for myself, and not just, try to be practical about being creative or do what other people wanted of me. And so I think it was the watching myself resist Like I refused to talk about my mom or my family for the first few sessions. I kept steering those questions away and like, I want to talk about my job and how awful my job is and how I want a new job. And but gradually it just felt good to be listened to and to feel what I really needed to feel. And from there, that's how I found my new career. And I went back to grad school to become a clinical psychologist. I quit my job in advertising. I worked on a Caribbean island for a summer, and then I flew off to California and decided I wanted to go to grad school somewhere with no snow. I'd grown up in a very snowy part of America. And yeah.
There is so much in that. That first session, when you said, I've got the best relationship. Yes. Like, did you mean that? Is that really what you thought? So
absolutely. I meant it, yeah.
How did you, in 3 sessions' time, decide that you want to talk about your mum, you want to talk about your family? And what was it that changed your life and in those moments?
My mother was an English professor. Right. And she hated it. And she loved language and she loved books and she loved writing. And I loved all that too, even more than art, right? I just love to be creative. And she basically said to me, you can't do that. It will break your heart. You need to do something practical that earns you a good living. And she hated it because she didn't get to teach people who loved to learn. She was at a university where English was like a class they had to take. Right. So she was thwarted in that, and she didn't want me to feel the same thing. And I understand that now.
Yeah. Okay.
But when I was young, I really thought I wasn't allowed. And I believed that I was not allowed to study what I wanted to study or be who I wanted to be. And I just accepted that. Like, I need to be practical. And you know what? So I did end up training, doing a lot of training in psychoanalysis and Jungian psychology, so one of the things Carl Jung says is nothing haunts a child like the unlived life of a parent.
Wow.
So that really, like, I didn't realize how much I was trying to kind of, in a way, get my mom's life right. Go do it again.
Wow.
But her life, right?
When did that revelation come?
I don't, it wasn't like an aha bang moment. Okay. It was more like, if you're up for the sunrise and you see the clouds, you see those like red clouds beginning to, and then you get busy and then you look back and the sun's out. Just that, it was that kind of gradual awakening. I can say I saw that therapist for 3 years.
Yeah.
And then I departed for grad school. So that was maybe, I was maybe 22 when I started with her. Yeah. Yeah. Because I went back to school when I was about 25, I think.
Okay.
Yeah.
I've got to say, you've got an extraordinary way with words. And reading the first 10 pages of your book just captivated me. So in terms of psychology, how would you describe it? What is it, and what is the goal for you with someone? Is that too many?
No. They're big questions.
Yeah.
I might take the second question first, and then we can see if we can define psychology by the time we're done this hour. But one of the psychologists that I read a lot of during my training days is named Wilfred Bion. And he was, he'd been a tank commander in World War II. And that's where he learned about human psychology. So he was very comfortable moving into like really uncomfortable depths in humanity. And he said, every psychologist should approach a session without memory or desire. And what he meant by that was no agenda. Don't hold on to what you think you know about a person, and don't have a desire for where they're supposed to go.
Oh,
yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. So I like that fit for me. And especially it was so healing for me because that was how I held myself with so much memory and desire. Here's what I'm supposed to be in this world.
Yeah.
And through my own therapy process, I really learned that the more rigidly I hold on to that, the less space there is for creative freedom, and the less space there actually is to become my, the truest, to live my true experience.
Right. So how are you then creating that space for others?
Well, it's a process, right? Because it's a paradox. So you can't help somebody without having a desire for them to feel better, right? So, and you can't get to know somebody without remembering things about them. So you can never arrive at a session without memory or desire. You need to, it's like, as quote Carl Jung again, a tension of the opposites. It's, you have to hold this tension between what you remember and what you long for, and letting go of memory and longing. So it's sort of the being willing to meet a new person every week, but also holding for them how they want to become. So I don't think of it, symptom reduction is really important. Excuse me. If someone comes in and says, I can't sleep, or I'm suffering migraines, or I think I'm ruining my relationship, like that, you definitely want to hold in mind that you want this to get better for them. But I need to also hold that I have no idea how that's going to happen.
Yeah.
And I have to trust that there's an unconscious connection between the two of us, where if I tune in, and this is one thing I use a lot in my sessions, is my own physical experience. I think there's a misconception about talk therapy that it is all about words. And I love the words, right?
Yeah.
Words are important to me. And I actually think words can make a physical change, right? If you can help someone put into language something that was ineffable, that was indescribable before, there's such a relief.
Yeah, absolutely.
Such a relief. But of course, the moment they do it, they imprison it. It's trapped in those words then. So it's a process of like capturing something with language and then letting it go again. So then you can capture it with, in a way, better language.
Yeah.
More accurately. You get more and more accurate. But the more accurate you get, the more you pin something down.
Yeah.
So it's just, you just keep pinning something down and freeing it, and pinning it down and freeing it until you get free enough. And that's the thing that people often ask me, like, when am I done? How do I know when I'm done? And I read something recently that it was an article in, gosh, I don't remember whether it was The Guardian or the Wall Street Journal, something like that, that said people could leave therapy a lot sooner, that people are staying in therapy too long and not enough work is getting done. And I really see that perspective. I understand that. And he said, I think he was a psychiatrist himself who was writing. This is a problem with me. I never remember to cite things, the name of who I've read or where I read it. He said, you shouldn't be going to therapy and talking to your therapist about your holidays, right? Like, it shouldn't just be a recitation of here's what I did this week, like you're chatting with a friend. And I agree with that. It shouldn't be that, but it should never be that. And so it's sort of, when do you want to stop? Well, whenever it's enough, as long as things are still happening.
Yeah.
And if someone is no longer in pain and that's enough for them, the therapist needs to let them go.
Yeah.
If someone says, I want to become as much myself as possible, I don't see any reason why they can't hang out in therapy forever. I mean, I remember once listening to an interview with Oliver Sacks. He was an incredible neuroscientist who, there was a movie called Awakenings. It's older now, but he did amazing research on L-Dopa, which was he used for like Parkinson's medication. And he was an incredible scientist, incredible. And I listened to him in an interview talk about his psychoanalysis. So he was a patient in psychoanalysis, and they said, how long have you been doing that? And he said, 18 years. And the interviewer said, whoa, that's a long time. Like, do you think, like, when's enough enough? And he said, psychoanalysis is what gave me the freedom to be me. So he was gay, and that was not accepted. And it was through his psychoanalysis that he learned to fully accept himself, right? He didn't need work accepting his brilliant mind, but his whole being. And he said, it's freed me up to meet my partner, to be fulfilled. And he said, yeah, sure, it's maybe expensive, but I've got the money and there are no bad side effects. Yeah. And that's the thing, that's the difference with medication. It's just you're talking to someone. So it's really, in some ways, a low risk proposition.
Yeah.
In other ways, there's nothing riskier that you could do.
I feel like here in Australia, it's changing slowly, but I feel like it's not as, I don't know if accepted is the word, but there's a little bit more stigma around therapy, I think, here in Australia than there is potentially in the States.
Yes.
Yeah. So how do you get someone, or not get someone, because that's not your job, obviously, but how do we make people understand that this is something that could really help them no matter what they're going through? Like, breaking down the myths and misconceptions around what it is.
I think, it's interesting. I really noticed that when I first relocated to Australia, because I came from the Bay Area, where pretty much everybody has a therapist, right?
Yeah,
it's one of the highest per capita populations of therapists in the world.
Yeah.
I think Argentina, a city in Argentina, psychoanalysis is very popular in Argentina.
Yeah, right.
Which is interesting. And then New York, Chicago, but the Bay Area is right up there.
Yeah.
And then I arrived in Adelaide, and it was very different. The practice I first got to when I said, well, I see people weekly, and they said, oh, that's like, you could be accused of over servicing if you see people weekly. I thought, oh, but my goodness, like the psyche loves that regularity. Coming to therapy is so scary. And thinking, like, I'm going to go talk about all the stuff I put off talking about the rest of my life.
Yeah. What's going to come out?
Yeah. So I find if people leave too long between sessions, they have to gear up the courage like it's the first time all over again.
Yeah.
So if you do it once a week, you got that rhythm there, right? Like going to the gym.
Yes.
Right. If you see a personal trainer, they're not going to say, that was a great first session. Let's see you again in 6 weeks.
Yeah.
Like,
exactly.
Yeah. Right. So that's one of the things I say. It works the same way, right? Yeah. Like it's emotional muscles that we're building. And so first of all, it feels better to come in more often because you get to see your strength. Whereas if you come in less often, what you tend to feel is weak, because you get more scared before each session. So then you think, this isn't working. I can't handle this. It's not doing anything. Another way of thinking about it is it's nourishing. So like feeding someone, I had a mentor say to me, it's like seeing someone if you're not seeing someone often enough, it's like giving them a very thin gruel. It's something, but it's really not going to keep them going, and it's not going to change anything.
Yeah.
So I found when I relocated from Adelaide to Sydney has a very international population, much more open to therapy. But still, what I noticed was there's this, and it's something I love about Australian culture, actually, this core like value around, it's not so much about independence, the way in America there's that kind of like, we sort of cling to our rights and our privileges are our right. And, we're very independent and our flag's on everything and all that.
Yeah.
Here, there's a subtler kind of quality where it's just self-sufficiency is maybe a better way to put it. And I kind of wonder, sort of in terms of a cultural complex, if that comes back to, a bit of how white Australia was settled.
Yeah.
But there is an aversion to dependency and a real fear that like, when people tell kids, don't cross your eyes, you'll get stuck that way. Yeah. It's like when sometimes when my Australian clients get to that stage where they're feeling a bit dependent on me, there's that fear, like, what if I
what if I can't do this without you?
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. And then it's like, but part of the growth, right, is that to go back into that stage so you can really learn to ask for help and to need people and be really close and connected. And then when people leave, I shouldn't be that important in their lives anymore.
Yeah.
It's like part of the sadness that I go through, because letting people go, these relationships are so close. And when I see them off, it's kind of like a mom launching her kids out into the world. It's like, and they're not going to call and tell me every Sunday how it's going, right? So it's like, I'm going to let go and not know. And, some people do send me updates now and again, which is lovely.
Yeah.
And I have some people who just kind of taper down over the years. And so I might see them once a year. And that's just a way of, kind of staying open to the change process, really.
Yeah.
To come out of an experience, you've got to go all the way into it. You've got to go through it. So that dependency stage is really important in the work.
Yeah. I feel like that, not that I can speak for every Australian, but I feel like that is the scariest part, is knowing that we do have to go deep into the shit that we don't want to even.
So in America, people will tell me about, they're coming to therapy, they're coming to talk, they're having a conversation with me. If I go on a holiday that's too long, they give me trouble about that. Yeah. I remember my first long holiday in America. I took 3 weeks to come to Australia.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. And oh my goodness, you would think I was going to be away for 6 months. And I felt like it was such a long holiday, because in America, we just don't do that very often. And, but here I say I'm taking a holiday and everyone wants to know where I'm going. They want me to have a wonderful time. In some ways it's easier. But, oh no, I've forgotten your question.
We're shit scared to go into the deep stuff.
Yes. But here people often say the therapy is having a chat. They're really happy to come in and have a chat with me. And, the language differences I am really interested in.
Yeah.
But I do think there's a way of kind of a casual minimization of pain here. She'll be all right. Like there's
yeah, totally. She'll be right.
Or people, I had to ask, and I do say, like, in America, we don't say flat. So you're going to have to tell me, what does flat mean? If you're feeling flat, what is flat for you?
Yeah.
Because I don't know that.
Wow.
Yeah.
Before this conversation, you said to me that you really wanted to break down the art of therapy, because obviously there's the science and then there's the art. So to you, what is the art of therapy?
That's a really good question.
Great. Thank goodness.
So look, that, and in some ways, right, this book that I'm working on, I want to see if I can describe it, because I actually don't know if I can.
Yeah.
I am, one of my favorite psychoanalytic writers is named Adam Phillips, and he's a psychoanalyst in London. If my memory serves, I believe his degree, his PhD, is in literature. And this is something that I don't think it happens anymore, but you used to be able to train as a psychoanalyst with an arts background. You didn't have to have a medical background. And a psychoanalyst, I should say, because probably people don't know. So a psychologist, and it's different in different countries. So in America, I had to get a doctorate to be a psychologist, and all psychologists are clinical psychologists, which means we can diagnose patients and offer medical treatment that gets medical rebates.
Right.
And here in this country, you can become a psychologist several different ways, with different levels of education, but only a master's level or above are clinical psychologists who can diagnose. Other psychologists can't, which to me is a little baffling, but can't diagnose.
Yeah, I've never really understood that.
Yeah. And it's, they just have, sort of less formal education. But the formal education is only part of it. So you can have a psychologist who just has sort of an undergraduate degree plus their 2 years of, overseeing experience. And they can be fantastic. And you can have a doctorate level person who doesn't know how to be with people, and the other way around, right? So all the credentials grant you is a minimum standard of like informed understanding. Not anything to do with, sort of the quality of the connection. And it's so much about fit, but that's a digression. I've completely forgotten again.
Your train of thought, art of therapy.
Yes, the art of therapy. Yeah. Yes, Adam Phillips. There we go. He gave an answer that I've never forgotten. And I don't think I'm not sure if I don't have enough chutzpah to go where he goes or enough professional security, as in I'm quite a bit younger. So in terms of the climate, I graduated, I got my degree during the GFC. The job security is not what it once was. But for psychoanalysts, they used to be able to train as a psychoanalyst. So they have in addition to their undergraduate and graduate level training, they've done extra study just in the art of psychoanalysis. And he said, I won't even entertain the question. It's an art. It's just obvious it's an art. It's not science. And he gave an example that I loved. And I can't remember if it was a refrigerator or a washing machine, but let's go washing machine. Is that when you buy a washing machine, you know what it's supposed to do. So you take it home. It's going to wash your clothes. It has a warranty. If it does not wash your clothes, you take it back and get your money back. But with a psychoanalysis or a therapy, I believe, the point is the not knowing. The point is you have to take a risk. So if you sit down with me and say, what am I going to get at the end of this? I'm going to say, I don't know.
Yeah.
Hopefully you will feel better and more yourself.
Wow.
But the point is that you have to take the risk. If it's not a risk, it doesn't give you anything. You don't go into the unknown in yourself. You don't tolerate uncertainty. If I tell you, okay, you come to me, see me for 10 sessions, I'll walk you through, here's what we're going to do each session. And by the time you're done, you won't have anxiety anymore. First of all, you're not going to have any anxiety coming into that because you think this is great. It's like passively receiving something. But you don't you can't make change that way.
Yeah.
So the art of it, and I think this is an important question to entertain. Adam Phillips doesn't have to entertain this question, but I'm not a psychoanalyst. I don't work with clients who already believe in their own unconscious life. Right. So when you go because my therapy was a psychoanalysis, my second therapy. So I had the one that was about 3 years where I decided to leave advertising and become a therapist. And then when I moved to California and went to grad school, it was clear I needed to be in therapy while I learned to be a therapist. Yeah. It's one thing I've never really understood is why some therapists don't have their own therapy. I mean, I have theories about why that is, but why you would want to spend your days taking someone a place you haven't been before.
Oh, yeah. I feel like this is gonna sound very reductionist, or I don't know if I'm labeling this right, using the right words, but how do you almost get that buy-in then? How do you make someone go, oh yeah, sure, I'll do something, got no idea where I'm going to end up, who I'm going to find along the way, what I'm going to discover, like that's all scary.
Yes, it is. It is. So a couple of ways. One, I tell the truth, and two, I lie.
Oh,
yeah.
Okay.
So I've noticed that as, because I'm sort of mid-career now, as my confidence is built, I've needed to lie less and less. And the lies aren't outright fibs, right? There's truth in it. Say, I've a portion of my practice is couples therapy. And another portion is performance work. In both of those things, there's a lot of skill that someone wants to acquire. And there is skill work in the therapy. It's just not as central as it appears. So, with couples, I might say, and this will be true. Look, we get taught how to do, we learn to play the recorder in primary school. We learn how to use paints. We learn maths. Nobody teaches you how to be in a marriage. We learn from example, right?
Yeah.
We either try to do the things our parents did that worked, or grandparents or neighbors or whoever we saw, or we try to do the opposite of what didn't work. And that's a tricky one, right? Because say an American who's familiar with soccer and NFL wants to play AFL.
Yeah.
And you say to them, okay, well, like football, but do it different. Like NFL, but play like AFL.
Yeah.
That doesn't work.
Yeah.
Right. So you need to learn some skills. So I'll say to them, like, we're going to learn, communication skills. And learn good form in an argument makes a big difference.
Oh, yeah.
Big difference. And we will.
These are life skills. This is what every single person on the planet needs.
Yeah. Look, and you know what? I've seen people come in. Some of those, some of the programs, in the church, some of the counseling before marriage programs teach really great skills, really great communication skills. Now, and they might have, I don't know, 4 or 6 sessions, something like that, where they practice these communication skills or learn them. But they are life skills.
Yeah.
We can't learn to play the violin in 4 to 6 hours. How are we going to learn to be in this complex, deep, layered relationship that we might bring children, pets, other family members into? So I'll also say it takes a while to learn those skills.
Yeah.
And hopefully that's enough for the buy-in. But as I've gotten more and more comfortable in my own practice, sometimes people will say, well, can you give me homework, or what do I do next? Or how do I fix this?
Yeah.
And I'll just say, I don't know. We're going to have to find out. Because part of it is, patients, people. Right?
Yeah.
I actually like the term patient. I know it's old fashioned.
Yeah.
And we say mostly client now. But I find client really impersonal because it's, everyone's got clients. Hairstylists have clients. A patient is someone that you're willing to hold, right? And it takes patience to do the work, and you need to give over a little bit of yourself to the work as you do it. So I don't know. I like it, but I understand how it's also, you don't have a head cold, right? It's not, you're not being checked into hospital. It can have that infantilizing quality. I don't know. I'm sort of between both worlds on that one. But I think saying I'm surprised at how often people are happy to hear that truth, that this is going to be really hard.
Yeah.
And you're going to feel like you don't know how to do it. And you're going to assume that I'm sitting over here just waiting for you to get to the truth, knowing exactly what it is you need to do and watching you figure it out. But I don't know. I might have some ideas and I will help you with whatever I can. But the important thing, right, is that you want to go somewhere new. So neither one of us have been there before.
Yeah. Oh, that's so good. And that's something that I wouldn't have thought in that whole process, and understanding or knowing that now that you say that, and understanding that is kind of reflective of the path that I've been on at the moment, like not knowing exactly what life is bringing, and trying to balance between not completely panicking and embracing the whole thing and learning along the way is really tough.
Yeah, it is. It is.
And having someone to move through that is really powerful and beautiful and empowering.
My favorite things about being a therapist is I get to meet people in all different walks of life and learn all this stuff.
Yeah.
So, but I think it's my love of learning that's more helpful, really.
Yeah.
It's my ability to be a beginner and to
Embrace
sit in and tolerate uncertainty, which I'm, by the way, not always good at.
Yeah.
Like I'll jump to knowing answers too quickly in sessions, but I can check myself and come back to no, this is painful because we're really doing the work right now, because neither one of us really know if this is helping.
Mm-hmm.
So sitting with that uncertainty, because that is the most sort of tricky thing for the human brain to tolerate, is not knowing.
Yeah.
There's so much to talk about here, isn't there?
There's so much, and there's so many different facets of it as well, right? And it's really hard to go, well, what's next? What's most important? But who am I to judge what's important in all of this?
Yeah. And who am I? And that, one of the...
You're a doctor of psychology.
Yes.
That's who you are.
That's supposed to give me something, right?
Yeah.
What it gave me, is the canvas, right?
Yeah.
Is the framework. And that is incredibly important to the work, right? You think, well, a session lasts, 50 minutes or an hour or 75 minutes. And then it's as if the therapist has this whole plan. And I think actually that is the way a lot of therapists are educated these days, with cognitive behavioral therapy being the primary. It used to be psychoanalysis was the popular one. And that was then very rigid, right? The therapist knew everything. If you ever watched the series Mad Men?
No.
Okay. It has an example of one of the most toxic sort of psychoanalytic therapies that gave me the creeps when I saw it. But it is the therapist knows everything.
Yeah.
And the patient is like an eternal dependent child that the therapist then just says, here's what's wrong with you. Here's what you have to do about it. Here's what's wrong with you.
Yeah. On that, the nicest depiction, could you say, of a therapist-patient relationship I found, I'm interested to hear what you think, was Good Will Hunting.
I knew you were going to say Good Will Hunting. I thought, because Good Will Hunting, and then also oddly, I don't know that it's, that when you said nicest, I figured it was Good Will Hunting.
Yeah.
Because The Sopranos was quite interesting too.
I haven't watched it.
But look, I think very rarely, like if my job were as easy as saying it's not your fault, that would be fantastic. And it was like a little bit of a caricature of therapy, and it worked so fast, right? It wasn't, he wasn't in therapy that long. But in terms of, it's a movie, but in terms of capturing the kind of the relational essence of it, I did think it was really accurate.
Yeah.
I did think that there was that, I mean, we have a saying in the industry, talk about your scars, not your wounds, right? So you're not going to speak openly about the places where you're still wounded, because we're all still wounded, right? I might not. Though I do work a little differently with couples in that than with individuals. But so generally you speak about, where you have already addressed the pain, so that you can come from a place of stability for your client. And in the Robin Williams character in that, it's a bit of both, right? Like he's worked through a lot of the abuse stuff from his own father.
Right.
But he's not worked through the death of his wife.
Yes.
And the way the Matt Damon character just needles and needles and needles him, that does happen, right? Where people can just really sense, like, you show me your human pain so I can learn how to handle human pain, because I'm in so much.
Yeah.
And I thought that was pretty accurate, and how deeply they're affected by each other.
Right.
What Jung used to say is, like, the patient needs to be, or the therapist needs to be infected by the patient's illness and not succumb to it.
Right.
I mean, that was the days that they spoke very differently about what was going on. Yeah. But he basically said, you have to allow yourself to be moved.
Yeah.
You have to allow yourself to fall apart. But then you have to hold it. And you have to hold, again, that's where that canvas comes in. You have to hold a framework or a structure where you're not actually falling apart. Like, you're not sitting in the room both talking about your breakups.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I've had clients come in and say, like, my boyfriend cheated on me, and I've left my last therapist because she started talking about how her boyfriend cheated on her.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. Not good.
Yeah.
But you have to allow yourself, kind of like an actor does, I think, when I've chatted with some actors about how they do their work. And it's very similar in a way.
Yeah.
You have to honestly go there in yourself. One of the things I do say, if I do a mindfulness exercise with clients, is, we'll both close our eyes and do some breathing or some visualization. And I might peek occasionally, just check on, see how they're doing. But I close my eyes too. And what I focus on is not them, but me.
Mm-hmm.
Sort of, where do I feel a catch in my breathing? Do I feel butterflies in my tummy? Is any part of my body feeling numb or activated? Because that's probably going to tell me what's going on in the room. So it's a technique called reverie, where you allow your mind to kind of, and your being really, to drift and just experience, just kind of go with the flow of where they are. But you have to do that in a tight framework.
What's that tight framework, and how do you find that balance of the wound and the scar? Like, how do you know where that line starts and ends?
That's an interesting one. First of all, my default is not to say anything about myself.
Okay.
So if I'm going to say something about myself, it's for a reason or because I've been drawn into it. Right. So there, like, some clients really like to have a chat at the beginning about, the weather, or especially if I'm, in a different city than they are, we're seeing each other online.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of that. And that I'm of course revealing small things about myself. But if I'm going to say something big, like, for example, in couples therapy, I do more self-revelation in couples therapy, because I think when you're asking two people to take such immense risk of trust in each other, right? Because if they're going to be vulnerable and if they're going to communicate with good form, it means showing so much feeling. If think about the difference between, please stop shaming me. You always shame me, or I feel really ashamed. Like, I feel really ashamed is a much more vulnerable thing to say. So the last thing I want them thinking really is that my relationship is all totally together.
Yeah.
Because then it's this ideal of like, oh, I've got to somehow become like somebody else. Or
here I am on this pedestal.
Yes.
You must reach.
Yes.
Yeah.
And really, it's the same thing in individual therapy, except because the relationship is so much more intensely just the two of you, you're a dyad together. I can't knock myself off the pedestal. Right. I'm often on this pedestal, and it's confining on the pedestal, right?
Yeah.
You can't move much. So sometimes when I need to be free, I might need to take myself down off the pedestal a bit. And doing that is showing more of my process, or answering a question with an I don't know, or yes, this silence is hard for me too, something like that. But really, to do the growth, they have to knock me down. Right. I have to, if I'm the hero who's going to save and rescue them and give them the good, healthy life, over time, they have to learn that they are their own.
What does that mean?
Often, and I notice more in Australia than happened in the Bay Area, but there'll be this idea, and I think it's very much in the medical community and kind of the way we revere medicine these days, where you go into the specialist is the expert. They're going to tell you what needs to happen for your body and what you need.
Yeah.
And you just submit to that. The problem is that if you're submitting, you're not becoming more yourself. If we submit, we're becoming less ourselves. So if someone comes in and says, you know everything, you get me better than anybody, you always put it into just the right words, that kind of thing, I'm on the pedestal.
Yeah.
And I need to come off that pedestal so they can stop submitting to my version of their lives. And if I take myself off, again, I'm still being the hero. I'm just climbing onto a different pedestal then.
Yeah.
So it really needs to be like, I need to screw up.
Yeah.
And I will. Right. I'll be late for a session, or I'll go on a holiday, or I'll say totally the wrong thing, or I won't get it. And the wonderful thing about therapy, and this was really, you asked a question a while ago about how did my therapy help? I'd never felt anger before, let alone had a really safe place to talk about it. So, yeah, I mean, like, I gotten angry plenty, especially at my sister, but like, I'd never really felt the goodness of anger. I felt anger was And I really believed it, right? Anger was dangerous. I cried whenever I got angry, like it felt impotent. Nobody listened to me when I got angry. I flew into rages and had little like tantrums, and they didn't do much. They didn't get results. And I remember when my therapist said, I don't think you've ever really felt your anger. And one day I got angry with her. There's two moments in both my therapies where I really felt a powerful anger. And the first one, she had to poke me much more. She said that she was angry with me because I hadn't told her the truth about something. And then I got really angry with her for being angry with me because I was her perfect patient, right? I was like the star student.
Yeah.
And how could she be angry with me? I was so affronted. And it was so freeing because we were both angry with each other and expressing ourselves. And then she was really happy to see me when I came back again. Like it was okay. It didn't destroy the relationship. It didn't have terrible consequences. In fact, I felt closer because I understood too how important it was to her to hear the truth from me.
You said the goodness of anger.
Yeah.
What is that? How do we know?
How do we know?
How do we know when our anger is
When it's good?
When is good?
It's always good.
When is it not good?
Okay. So that's the difference between the emotion and aggression, actions. And even aggression can be good too, right? Like if you think about if you've ever left anybody or if you've ever had to leave a family member and go far away, the energy it takes to pull that door closed behind you, right? There's aggression in that. In sex, there's aggression when we are actually trespassing on each other's bodies.
Yeah.
Like we need that to be able to take up our space in the world. And you've probably felt it maybe, at the gym when if you're lifting heavy weights, right? There's an aggression in that movement.
Yes, but I wouldn't say I'm angry.
No, but you might be.
Ooh, okay.
Yeah. So anger, right? I mean, it doesn't all have to be emotion driven action,
sure,
right?
Okay.
But we all feel angry every day. And mild anger just feels like assertion. Right? That like, oh, I'm uncomfortable. I want to change positions, that just clearing a little bit more space for ourselves in the world.
Yeah.
And those little bits of assertion and the big anger it's all a spectrum. So anger, one way I like to think of emotion is it's just like weather, right? We need them all, right? A rainy day is going to feel like a gift from the heavens in a drought.
Yeah.
We've had 10 rainy days in a row and, it might feel really depressing. So it depends on context, but it's happening. It's happening whether you want to admit it or not. So if you don't admit it's raining and you say, well, I'm not taking an umbrella, I'm not taking a coat, I'm going to walk to work. You're going to be wet when you get there.
Yeah.
So, if you're angry and you can feel it, you can be free. You don't have to talk about it and you don't have to punch someone in the nose and you don't have to scream. You don't have to break things and you don't have to alienate anybody.
Yeah.
And that was, I think, the big thing of finding out that being angry with someone did not mean I had to disconnect from them.
Ooh.
Yeah. That was huge learning.
Yeah.
And I love to do that learning with clients.
You must love it when you see those light bulb moments in patients.
I have to watch out too because they can be addictive.
Yeah.
So there's
validating.
Yes. So it can be that like it's almost like a sweet treat, right? That light bulb moment. And then if there isn't one of those, was the session a failure?
Yeah.
It's like, but there isn't like to grow great crops, you've got to leave a field fallow. So there are these sessions that are dull or lifeless or they're teaching something. We just don't know what yet.
Oh, that's so important. And I think that's something that we need to remind ourselves of often because in those spaces, like you
Yeah.
just said, that dullness, or as I like to call them, stagnation.
Yes,
Feels
yes.
stagnant. It's like
Yes.
something is coming of this, even if it doesn't feel like it
Yes.
is.
And it's such a paradox, right? This is
Yeah.
between working to like pull yourself out of the mud
Yeah.
and letting go and saying like, well, it's here I am now.
Yeah.
Here I am. One of the things that someone, and this was not a therapist, but it was a friend in the therapy world. I was going through a really rough time, and I couldn't quite accept it. So I couldn't give into it, but I also couldn't quite figure out how to fight it and what I was meant to be doing or
Yeah.
changing in my life. And I came into work one day. I was at that point I was working at an NGO, and he said, "It's okay. You just sit there in the ashes." And the reference, of course, was to the phoenix that rises from the ashes.
Yeah.
And it just in that moment sort of clicked into a different perspective for me. Like, yes, like I was actually resting. It was a mess at the time, but I was resting.
Yeah.
And I would be ready to rise again. I had to trust that.
Goosebumps. Wowzers.
So, yeah.
Gosh.
I realize I still have not even attempted to answer your question about what the art
it is.
Yes. So maybe what I'll do is I'll give you that experience, and I think it was in the bit you've read about my book, but this metaphor. So I really think therapy is all metaphor, right?
Yeah.
It is all, you come in and it is a metaphor for the life that you live. We communicate, all our communication is metaphor, right? It's as if we understand each other. So we're using words right now to represent something else. And that something else is always ineffable. And as we use the words, it makes a connection, it makes a bridge between us, but makes a barrier. And it is the crossing, right? The language right now is the crossing. So, I thought about this once when I went to an art exhibit, and this was visual version of it, and there was no language involved here, but I felt like this is what the process felt like to me. So I was going to see this, it's a modern art gallery in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, of all places. Pittsburgh's actually a really lovely city if you ever happen to find yourself in the center of Pennsylvania. But it was called the Mattress Factory, and there was an exhibit. Unfortunately, I can't remember the name of the artist. But what it was there was this little, it was like a snail shell like pathway that you walked into, and you could only go in a few people at a time. And you sort of walked into the center of this structure. You didn't know what it was because it was pitch dark. So you go in and you walk through and you come up against this railing and you have to stop. And it was silent, just a little bit of a whirring sound from a fan in the background. And then you just stand there. And the instructions had just been go in and stand for a while, come back out when you're done. And I was with a guy I was dating at the time, and I was a little bit skittish, and I started to get a little freaked out. Like, is something going to come at me? What's going to happen here? Right. Which says something about my psychology, right?
That's what I would be thinking.
Yes. My vigilance, right? I went, my sympathetic nervous system spiked up a little bit. He was a different kind of character, and he felt like this was really exciting and fun, and we should make out. We were young at the time. And so we started this sort of whisper bickering, and agreed on a compromise that we would stay. So, and not make out. And see what happened.
Yeah.
And I don't know how long we stood there. It felt like forever. It was probably just a couple minutes. But what started to happen, and it was the uncanniest thing, this room had appeared pitch black, and then it just lit up slowly. And at first it was this kind of tiny little light in the distance, and then it was kind of pinkish, like a sunrise. And then it was just this soft light, and you could see the walls were white. The room was maybe the size of the room we were in now, maybe a bit bigger than this. There's nothing in it. And there's a little fan in the corner that was making that whirring sound. And I feel like that's the therapy process, right? It's not about what you're going to see at the end. It's not about you're going to come out some perfect phoenix-like creature. It's not about getting it right as you do it. It's about staying with it, right? So don't give in to the urge to flee. Don't make out with your therapist. Stop fighting. Pay attention. And it's that process of revelation, right? That illumination. And then there you are in this beautiful, ordinary room. Beautiful room. Yeah.
When I read that, I was like, that is the greatest metaphor for life and everything. And yeah.
Of course, it takes longer than the 5 minutes to look at that art exhibit, but
a little bit longer.
You know what? It reminds me a little bit. There's a line from, oh my gosh, I can't even remember which play. It's Shakespeare. Is it The Tempest? It might be The Tempest.
I wouldn't know anyway. Okay. So you could say any play you like.
All right. I'm going to have to paraphrase because I don't remember the whole passage, but it's something like, lovers, madmen, and poets are of imagination all compact. So he's saying they're all the same.
Whoa, right? Say that again.
Lovers, madmen, and poets are all the same. Right? So the lover sees the brow of the beauty of Helen in the brow of Egypt. So in other words, sees beauty where there is none, apparently. Yeah. The madman, I can't remember what the madman does, but the poet, he said, doth glance from earth to heaven. Anyway, I'm butchering this, but he basically says it gives to airy nothingness a local habitation and a name. So basically, it finds words for things, finds words for the ineffable. And that this is crazy business, right? Like it's crazy. Lovers are crazy. Crazy people are crazy. Yeah. Poets are crazy. But that's humanity, right?
Exactly. Yeah. Oh my goodness, Alex. I'm so mindful of time because I know you've got to go. But I feel like this is just a drop in the ocean of
it's a very unstructured drop today.
I mean, I've got all these questions. I think we've got to one or two. Okay. But in terms of ending this conversation, what I like to do is, number one, try and give the listeners something tangible, if possible.
Sure-ish. In this conversation about the intangible.
Exactly. Yeah. But also what I like to do is have the guest ask a question to the listener. So,
okay.
So firstly, my last question to you is if there's anything that we haven't covered today that you think is really important that you want listeners to walk away with, what would that be? Or if we've covered something today which you think needs to be reiterated and left with this listener, what is it?
Sure.
So have we not touched on something, or have we, that's really important that you want this listener to walk away with?
This is a little bit of science here and I don't remember where I read this study, but on average, it takes somebody 6 years to actually book in a therapy session after they've thought about going.
Wow.
That's on average. And I can't remember if that's couples or individuals, and I can't cite that information, but basically it's a long time.
It's a long time.
So I guess what I want people to know is you don't have to have any particular kind of problem, right? Nothing is too much or not enough for therapy. Also, talk therapy is not the only way to get therapy. So if we have another conversation, we can talk more about that.
We're definitely having another conversation.
Okay.
If you're okay with that.
I look forward to it. But you're not going too slowly. You're not doing it wrong. And one day, right, you'll screw your courage to the sticking point and you make that call. Or you send the email, or these days often a text. Because it is actually initiating the process that's the hardest part. And that's true for everything. but it takes so much courage. And so I just want people to know that if they're thinking about it, but just haven't worked up the courage to do it yet, you're right. Like you get there, and it's not, it doesn't have to be a particular type of problem.
Yeah.
Yeah. I guess that's it. It's not problems at all that therapy's about.
Yeah.
Yeah. I get that comment a lot. It's sort of dinner parties and that kind of, I don't know how you do it all day, sit around listening to people's problems. And I think, well, if that's what I did all day, I don't think I want to do it either.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. And I think that's one thing I certainly think about is, I was about to say problems. Are my problems big enough?
Yes. I think there's a lot of worry about that. There's a lot of worry that it has to be, and I guess this would be what I would want people to think about actually is, are you able to take your experience seriously? Like we need to be light. We need to have fun, right? We need to laugh, but we also need to validate our own inner experience. And that question, are my problems serious enough, points to a struggle with that validation. So like, if that's the only struggle, that's still worthy. Like, why not?
Yeah.
Why not get some company? We can always go further with company than we can go alone, right? All our pain's relational.
Yeah.
It takes a relational cure.
Oh, I love that.
Yeah.
Alex, this has just been so phenomenal. And like I said, I could ask you a million more questions, but you have to leave. So firstly, thank you so much for even taking the time to do this.
It's been my pleasure. So much fun.
Yeah, great. And secondly, we'll book this in for next time.
Sounds great. Yes.
Next.
We'll put a framework around it. Yes.
Exactly. Yeah. That's what I thought I had.
Yeah, you did. You did. And this is how it goes, right?
Yeah.
In sessions, so often people will say, I have so much I want to tell you. And then we start with one thing and we go completely different place than was imagined. Yeah. And completely different than what I imagined too.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. So we'll find out where we go next time.
Exactly. That's it.
Yeah.
Oh, thank you so much.
Thank you, Jackie.
How awesome is Alex? Like we said, that is a very small drop in a very large ocean of just the beginning of what psychology is, just the beginning of what therapy is and what it could look like for you. If you are interested in seeking out therapy with Dr. Alex, then I'll have all those links and contact details in the show notes. I want to have Alex back on the show, and I would love to know what you want to know from Alex. If there's any questions that you have around a psychology session, therapy, what you need to do, whatever it is that you potentially have, any questions that you have for Alex that you would love to know, let me know. And we're going to ask Alex all of the questions. DM me over on Instagram, JackieTan 2.0, and let me know your questions, and I will get Alex back on the show, and we're going to dive deeper into the art of psychology, therapy, the mind, anything and everything. I'm so fascinated by it. So this was such a fun conversation, and I really want you to be a part of the conversation as well. So send me your questions if you have them, and we will get Dr. Alex back on the show. If you loved this episode, I'd so appreciate you sharing it with your friends, family, subscribing to the podcast, and giving it a 5-star rating would really help to grow the podcast. I appreciate you. Thank you so much. Stay awesome, and we'll catch you next time.